When I think back to the moment everything in my life quietly shifted off its axis, I always go to the smell first. Not the big dramatic scenes that came later, not the tears, not the shouting, not the way my chest felt like it was cracking open from the inside. No. I think about the smell of overcooked collard greens and cheap vanilla candles, mixing together in that tiny kitchen like two things that were never meant to share the same air. It was a Sunday afternoon, one of those heavy Atlanta Sundays when the sky hangs low and refuses to commit to rain or sunshine. I had driven to my mother's apartment like I always did on the first Sunday of the month, with a plastic container of her favorite carrot cake on the passenger seat and a quiet knot of guilt in my stomach about how little time I had given her since my promotion. She loved to tell people I was the first woman in our family to make senior associate at a big firm. She said it like it was a trophy she kept on a shelf just to point at it when visitors came. The truth was a little less shiny. I was tired all the time, I had forgotten what weekends felt like, and my relationship with my husband existed mostly in the space between conference calls and case files. Still, when I parked in front of her building and stepped out into the hot air, I felt that familiar little mix of comfort and irritation that always showed up when it came to my mother. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder, grabbed the cake, and walked toward the front door, the cracked concrete steps still marked with faint chalk drawings from the neighborhood kids. Upstairs, the hallway smelled like fried food and fabric softener. The old fluorescent light flickered above, casting a sickly yellow hue on the chipped brown doors. Mom's apartment, 3B, had a little wreath on it with faded silk flowers that had seen better years. I knocked twice, then let myself in, because she insisted on never locking her door during the day. Her voice floated from the kitchen, telling me she was in there, telling me the door was open, telling me I was late. I rolled my eyes even though she couldn't see me and slipped off my sandals, the cool linoleum floor under my feet catching me off guard after the heat outside. The living room looked exactly the same as always, down to the slightly crooked framed photo of me on my law school graduation day, sitting proudly on top of the TV stand. The couch had that same floral pattern that had been outdated since before I was born. A thin layer of dust clung to the fake plants in the corner, catching the afternoon light in delicate gray fuzz. In the kitchen, she stood at the stove, stirring a pot with a wooden spoon like she was waging war on whatever was inside. Steam rose from the collard greens, too dark and clumped to be anything but overdone. She had a dish towel slung over her shoulder, and her hair, mostly gray now, was pulled back in a loose bun. She turned when she heard me and told me I was finally there, that she thought I had forgotten her, that her only child had become too important for her old mother. I told her I had been caught in traffic. She told me traffic was just an excuse people used when they were tired of trying. It was the same script we had been performing for years. I set the carrot cake on the counter and leaned over to kiss her cheek. Her skin felt dry and warm, and she smelled like she always did on Sundays, cooking oil, lotion, and a whisper of the floral perfume she only wore when she expected visitors. She asked me how work was going. I told her it was fine, busy. She told me I was going to make partner before 40, said she could feel it in her bones. She asked if Marcus was still working too much. I told her he was doing what he had to do. She made a little sound in her throat that could have been disapproval or indigestion. With my mother, the two often sounded the same. Marcus. My husband. At that moment, while I stood in my mother's kitchen watching steam curl from a pot of dying collard greens, Marcus was probably in his office downtown, hunched over spreadsheets, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. Or at least, that's what I told myself he was doing. Lately, whenever he told me he had to stay late, some small disloyal part of my brain whispered that there might be more interesting reasons a man would avoid going home. I pushed the thought away. Resting against the counter, I picked at a loose thread on my blouse and listened to my mother talk. She told me the neighbor upstairs had gotten into a fight with his girlfriend again, that she could hear them through the vents. She said the lady next door had a new boyfriend and that he looked too young for her. She slid any information she could gather into her own mental filing system, like the entire building was a case she was investigating. Then she said something that made the air in the room feel heavier. She told me my aunt had called. For a moment, the sound of the bubbling pot, the hum of the refrigerator, even the distant echo of traffic from the street outside seemed to go quiet. My aunt. My mother's younger sister. The woman I hadn't seen in years. The woman whose name carried the weight of stories half told and memories half erased. Growing up, she was the unpredictable one, the one who blew in and out of our lives like sudden wind, loud, laughing too much, drinking too much, loving too hard, and leaving before anyone could ask her to stay. My mother said my aunt wanted to talk to me. She said my aunt had asked for my number again. She said she had told her that if I wanted to talk, I would call myself. She said she wasn't going to be the messenger anymore. I asked her what my aunt wanted. She shrugged, turning back to the pot, telling me she probably wanted something, because she always did. Money, a favor, a place to stay, a listening ear. Trouble, basically. As she spoke, I saw something shift in her shoulders, a slight hunch, like the mention of her sister added 10 pounds of invisible weight. My mother had always carried resentment when it came to my aunt, resentment and a kind of grief she pretended she didn't feel. I changed the subject. I asked about her health, her blood pressure, the last checkup she'd had. She answered every question with a wave of her hand and a tired sigh, telling me she was too old to be poked at by doctors, that she would die when God decided, and there was nothing a prescription could do about that. After we ate, too much food, as always, plates heavy with rice and cornbread and those poor overcooked collard greens, I helped her clear the table. She protested, as she always did, insisting that guests shouldn't wash dishes and that she could manage, but her hands looked more fragile than they used to, the veins raised, the knuckles swollen. I started washing anyway. While I stood at the sink, warm water running over my fingers, my mother leaned against the doorway and watched me. There was a quiet to her I wasn't used to seeing. The usual commentary, the endless observations and criticisms and questions seemed to have run out. After a stretch of silence, she told me she had been thinking about my childhood a lot lately. She said seeing me so busy, always rushing between work and home, made her remember what it had been like when I was small, when I still reached for her hand in crowded places. She said she had made mistakes. That sentence alone was enough to make me pause, dish in hand. My mother did not talk about her own mistakes. Other people's, yes. Hers, never. She told me there were things she had kept from me when I was young. She said she thought she was protecting me. She said she was starting to wonder if she had only been protecting herself. I turned off the water. A droplet slid down the plate I was holding, catching the light before falling into the sink. I asked her what she was talking about. She rubbed her forehead, the way she always did when she was trying to find the right words, or when she wanted to delay saying the wrong ones. Then she told me that before I was born, there had been another pregnancy. I felt my heart stutter. She told me she had lost it. That was the version I had always heard, a quiet miscarriage tucked into a single sentence, rarely discussed. It was the thing my mother referred to only when she wanted to explain why she was so overprotective when I was a baby. This time, she said it differently. She told me that when she was younger, she had been in a situation that wasn't clean, wasn't respectable, wasn't the kind of thing people in the family liked to talk about. She told me she had been involved with a man she should not have trusted, a man my grandmother warned her about, a man who came and went on his own terms. She told me she had been pregnant then. She told me the baby didn't come home. My stomach twisted. I asked what she meant by that. The words came out sharper than I intended. She said some babies are taken by God before they get a chance to be taken home. She said some babies don't get born at all. She said other things too, but they blurred together, becoming a fog of vague phrases and half-answers. I told her she was talking in circles. She looked at me with eyes that suddenly seemed older than her face, heavy with something I couldn't yet name. She told me it was complicated. That there were other people involved. That it wasn't just her story to tell. I felt a spark of impatience ignite into anger. I told her I was 32, not 12. That if there was something she thought I should know, she needed to stop hiding behind excuses like it's not the right time and you wouldn't understand. I told her I was tired of hearing fragments. She looked away first. Then she said she was afraid I would hate her. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the pause that followed. I asked her why I would hate her. She didn't answer. Instead, she told me that when my aunt called, she had said something that made her blood run cold. She told me my aunt had mentioned that she'd been having dreams lately, the kind that feel more like memories than imagination. Dreams about babies and blankets and my grandmother's old bedroom. Dreams that left her waking up with wet cheeks and a hollow ache in her chest. My mother said she had told her to stop talking nonsense. But the way her voice trembled told me she had not believed it was nonsense at all. A phone buzzed somewhere behind us. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and went to my bag in the living room, my heart still pounding from the half-truths my mother had just dropped into the air. My phone screen lit up with a message. From Marcus. He told me he was going to be late again, that a client emergency had come up, that I should eat without him. He added a small apology, one that felt more like habit than regret. I stared at the words longer than necessary. My mother shuffled into the living room and asked if everything was all right. I told her it was just my husband, working late again. She made that non-committal sound in her throat and sat down slowly on the couch, her knees cracking audibly. Then, as if she had just remembered something important, she told me Marcus had stopped by to see her the week before. I blinked. She said he had brought her groceries. He had said he was in the neighborhood, that he had a little time before a meeting, that he wanted to check on her. She said it like it was a nice thing, like it was normal for my husband to visit her without mentioning it to me. A strange chill slid down my spine. I asked what they had talked about. She said they only talked about simple things. The weather. My work. How tired I looked sometimes. She said he had asked her if I was happy. She said he had looked worried when he asked. I swallowed hard. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I told myself Marcus had always been good to my mother, that he brought her small gifts and fixed things around her apartment and made her laugh in a way few people could. I told myself it was sweet that he checked on her. But beneath those rational thoughts, something small and sharp dug in. My mother must have seen something cross my face, because she leaned forward and said he seemed like a good man. Then she took it back almost immediately, saying good might be too strong a word these days, that men were complicated, that people could love you and hurt you at the same time. I sat down across from her, my mind buzzing with too many threads, none of them connecting yet. She told me she wanted to tell me everything that day, but that she couldn't do it alone. She said she needed to talk to my aunt first. She said they both had pieces of a story, and if they were going to pull it apart, they had to do it together. I told her she was scaring me. She said fear was better than ignorance. There was that word again. Fear. It had been hovering in the room since I walked in, thick and invisible, like smoke from a fire that hadn't yet broken through the walls. Later, when I left her apartment and walked down the stairs, the air outside felt even hotter than before. My skin prickled with sweat, and the sun glared off the windshields of parked cars, making me squint. I felt like I was walking through a fog of questions. Who was the man she had been involved with before I was born? What had really happened to that first pregnancy? Why was my aunt suddenly dreaming about babies and blankets and my grandmother's room? Why had Marcus visited my mother without telling me? When I got home that evening, our house felt unfamiliar in that way that happens when your inner world has shifted but your outer one hasn't caught up yet. The throw blanket on the couch, the stack of unpaid bills on the coffee table, the half-empty mug Marcus had left in the sink, all of it looked slightly wrong, like props in someone else's life. I stood in the middle of the living room, keys still in my hand, listening to the silence. It was the kind of silence that hummed with something underneath. I checked the time. Marcus should have been home an hour ago. 2, if his text had included the usual cushion of understatement. I walked into the bedroom, dropped my bag on the chair, and noticed his watch on the dresser. He never went to the office without it. A faint, metallic taste filled my mouth. I told myself he might have just forgotten it. People forgot things all the time. But Marcus was not people. Marcus was precise in a way that bordered on obsession. He did not forget his watch. He did not forget his routines. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. The content made my whole body go cold. Someone wrote that I should ask my mother what really happened in the hospital the year I was born. They added that secrets only stay buried as long as people do. Then they sent a second message. They told me Marcus already knew. I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred. I was 32 years old, standing in the middle of my own bedroom, and for the first time in my life, I had the strangest feeling that my marriage, my childhood, and my own identity were all sitting on a trapdoor I didn't know was there. And my mother and my husband were standing on it together. I didn't sleep that night. Not even for a minute. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the glow from the streetlight outside casting pale gold stripes across the room. The sheets felt too warm, the air too still, my skin too tight. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same 2 sentences from that unknown number blinking behind my eyelids like neon signs. Ask your mother what really happened in the hospital the year you were born. Marcus already knows. Those words chewed through my insides until the sun came up. Marcus didn't come home. Not at midnight. Not at 1. Not at 3. He didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't even send one of those short messages he used to send when we were dating, the ones that said things like, "Still up? You awake? Thinking about you." I checked the parking lot from the window around dawn, his car wasn't there. That was when the panic started. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies. Not screaming or sobbing. This was the thin, silent kind that wraps around your lungs and squeezes until breathing feels like a luxury. By 8 a.m., I had showered, changed clothes twice, made coffee I didn't drink, and cleaned the kitchen counter 3 times without realizing I was doing it. At 9, I called my mother. She didn't answer. At 9:30, I called again. Still nothing. By 10, I was pacing my living room in slow, tight circles when my phone finally rang. I snatched it up so quickly I almost dropped it. Marcus. I answered, my breath catching in my throat. He didn't say hello. He didn't apologize. He told me he was coming home and that we needed to talk. His voice was wrong, too controlled, too flat, too much like a man rehearsing before stepping onto a stage he didn't want to be on. I asked him where he was. He told me he was 2 minutes away. When I hung up, I stood in the middle of the room, staring at the front door like something monstrous was about to walk through it. And maybe it was. He walked in wearing the same clothes he'd worn the previous morning, creased shirt, loosened tie, jacket missing. His eyes looked sunken, his jaw unshaven, but what scared me most was the expression on his face. Not guilt. Not fear. Resolve. He dropped his keys into the bowl by the door, glanced around the room as if making sure nothing had changed, then told me we shouldn't fight. I told him that depended entirely on what he was about to say. He rubbed the back of his neck, an old nervous habit, then told me he had gone to see my mother again the night before. My throat burned. He said she told him things. Things she had sworn she would tell me herself. Things she had kept hidden for over 3 decades. I felt rooted to the floor. I asked him why he went, why he didn't tell me, why he thought speaking to my mother behind my back was acceptable. He said he was trying to understand the truth before he hurt me with it. That sentence made something in my chest crack. The truth before he hurt me with it. I told him to say it. Right now. All of it. He exhaled slowly, as if releasing a confession he had carried too long, and told me the one thing my mother had never said aloud. I was not her first child. I knew that. I had always known about the lost pregnancy, the miscarriage, the grief she never spoke of. But Marcus shook his head. He said it wasn't a miscarriage. He said my mother had carried a baby to term. In the hospital. Alone. Terrified. And that baby didn't die. It was taken. My legs went weak. Marcus stepped closer but didn't touch me, maybe because he saw the way my body recoiled, or maybe because he knew what he was about to say next would destroy something between us. He told me my grandmother had orchestrated everything. She had arranged for my mother to sign papers she didn't read. She had told her it was for the best. She had told her it was the only way to fix the shame. My mother had been barely 20. Poor. Scared. Dependent. And my grandmother had used that fear like leverage. I whispered that this made no sense. Marcus told me there was more. My mother never saw the baby again. She thought the child had been taken into the system. Given to another family. Lost completely. But then he looked right at me, eyes dark and steady, and said the words that froze my blood. She never knew you were her second child. Or her first. Because she didn't know which baby she actually raised. I sank into a chair before my legs gave out completely. I told him he had to explain every single detail, slowly, clearly. He sat across from me, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together, like a man delivering a verdict he didn't want to read. He told me my mother had gone into labor alone. No one from the family was there. No one to advocate. No one to protect her. Marcus said she remembered two nurses whispering, a doctor arguing with someone in the hallway, paperwork being placed in front of her, her vision blurry from exhaustion and fear. She remembered crying. She remembered begging to see her baby. She remembered my grandmother arriving hours later, calm and composed, saying, "Everything is handled." But what handled meant was violent in its simplicity. The baby was gone. And my mother was told never to ask again. I felt bile rise in my throat. I covered my mouth, trying not to choke on it. Marcus continued. He said my grandmother had believed the baby belonged to the wrong man. Someone dangerous. Someone she didn't want tied to our family. Someone she despised. Someone my mother had been too ashamed to tell her about. I whispered the question before I could stop myself. Who was the father? Marcus looked at me for a long moment before answering. He said my grandmother believed the father was the same man my aunt had been seeing. The same man. Not two different affairs. Not two separate scandals. One man. Two sisters. Two pregnancies. But then, he paused, something even darker flashed across his expression. He said my grandmother suspected something worse. Something she kept hidden from both daughters. Something she never proved but believed with her entire soul. That the man had harmed my mother. That the pregnancy wasn't consensual. That my mother had been too traumatized to remember all of it clearly. My breath stopped completely. Marcus whispered that my grandmother thought she was saving my mother. Protecting her. Erasing the evidence of a man she feared. I felt the room tilt. I whispered that this couldn't be true. Marcus shook his head, slow, pained, and told me my mother had broken down the night before, sobbing so violently he thought she would collapse. She had admitted pieces of it. Not all. But enough. Enough that he believed every word. And then he said the line that split something inside me clean open. Your mother doesn't know who your father is. She doesn't know which baby she raised. And she doesn't know if the child she lost was you. I covered my face with my hands. I felt the kind of sound rise in my throat that doesn't belong to any language, just raw human panic. Marcus knelt in front of me, his voice barely above a whisper. He said he didn't want to tell me like this. He said he had tried to convince my mother to tell me herself. He said she had begged him for more time. I dropped my hands and stared at him. And that was when I noticed something. Fear. Not fear of losing me. Not fear of hurting me. Fear of the truth. I asked him why he cared so much. Why he was so involved. Why he kept going to her. Why he kept pushing for answers that weren't his to uncover. His silence sliced through the room. Then he whispered something that made every hair on my arm stand up straight. He said he had known. Long before the messages. Long before my aunt. Long before I asked any questions. That something about my birth story wasn't right. Because he had found something. In my mother's apartment. Months ago. A file. With my birth records. And another set of records. Another baby. Born the same night. Same hospital. Same floor. A baby girl. No name written. Just a timestamp. Identical to mine. I felt all the air leave my lungs. I asked him why he never told me. He whispered. Because I didn't want it to be true. I pulled away from him. I stood up. My legs were shaking, my pulse pounding in my ears. I told him he had no right. No right to go through my mother's things. No right to hide something so life-altering from me. He didn't defend himself. He just said. There's more. I froze. He looked at me with devastation in his eyes and whispered the words that changed everything. I think I found the other baby. The one who wasn't you. The one who was taken. The one who disappeared. My heart hammered against my ribs. I asked him how he could possibly know that. He said he had traced the second hospital record. And it didn't end in adoption. It didn't end in the foster system. It didn't end in tragedy. It ended in a transfer. To another ward. To another woman. A woman who couldn't have children. A woman approved for quiet, unofficial placements. A woman my grandmother trusted. A woman whose name he recognized. A woman who lived 5 blocks from where I grew up. I whispered the name before he could say it. My aunt. He nodded. And the world collapsed around me. My aunt didn't just raise the wrong child. She raised the missing one. The stolen one. The piece of my mother's life she thought had died. My sister. Alive. And living a life neither of us were meant to have. A life that could have been mine. A life that should have been hers. I sank onto the couch, shaking, unable to breathe. Marcus sat beside me. He didn't touch me. He didn't speak. We just sat there, 2 people staring into a truth so deep and dark it didn't feel real. Then he whispered the last thing I expected. And she knows. My eyes snapped to his. He nodded slowly. Your aunt knows. She's always known. She just never knew how to tell you. The room spun. My heartbeat thundered. And one thought rose above all the others, sharp as glass. If she knew. She wasn't the only one. I didn't know how long I sat there after Marcus said those words. Minutes, maybe. Or hours. Time didn't feel real anymore. Everything around me, the couch, the walls, the muted afternoon light, looked like a backdrop from a life I'd somehow stepped out of without meaning to. My aunt knew. That sentence circled my mind like a vulture, swooping lower each time, tearing off pieces of the life I thought I understood. My aunt had known. She had held the truth like a second heartbeat, silent but always there. She had raised a child beside me, my cousin, the girl I'd grown up with, laughed with, fought with, envied sometimes, and the whole time she must have wondered. Wondered which one of us belonged to her. Wondered which one of us didn't. Wondered what my grandmother had done. Wondered how to confess something that shattered everyone. I looked at Marcus. He sat rigid on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the floor. His silence made me nervous. Not the stillness of someone calm, but the stillness of someone bracing. I asked him what he meant. How did he know? Why was he so sure? His throat worked as he swallowed hard. He told me he hadn't been planning to tell me everything at once. He said he had hoped my mother would find the courage first. He said he had hoped there would be a gentler way to unwrap all of this. I told him gentleness was no longer an option. Then he took a shaky breath and told me about the conversation with my aunt. He had visited her. Not recently. Not last night. But months ago. Behind my back. He said he hadn't gone looking for her, she had reached out to him. Asked him to meet. Said it was about me. About something she didn't know how to say to my face. When he arrived, she was already crying. She told him her version of the story. The blanketed baby. The switch she suspected but couldn't prove. The guilt that grew like rot for decades. The dreams that haunted her. Then she told him something that made my skin crawl. She believed the girl she raised wasn't hers. And she believed I might be. But she wasn't sure. Not fully. Not until recently. I asked Marcus what had changed. What had happened recently that had made my aunt finally break? He hesitated. And it wasn't the kind of hesitation that comes from not knowing, it was the kind that comes from knowing something too big, too dangerous, too painful to say out loud. I whispered his name, and he finally met my eyes. He said my aunt had discovered something. Something physical. Something undeniable. A medical condition. Something my cousin, my sister, had developed. A condition that ran in the man who had fathered both pregnancies. A hereditary condition. My condition. My aunt's condition. My grandmother's condition. A bloodline condition. Shared only by one branch of the family. My mother's branch. Not my aunt's. The world tilted so violently that for a moment I saw nothing but white. I gripped the edge of the couch to steady myself. My aunt must have known then. Maybe not fully, maybe not mathematically, but emotionally, instinctively. She must have looked at her daughter, the girl she raised, and seen a stranger. She must have looked at me and seen something familiar where it did not belong. I asked Marcus why she hadn't told me herself. He closed his eyes. She tried, he said quietly. But your mother stopped her. My heart clenched. He said my mother had visited my aunt months ago, right after she found out my aunt had talked to him. He said she begged her sister to stay quiet, said the family couldn't go through that kind of pain again, said nothing good would come from dredging up the past. I whispered that my mother had lied to me my whole life. Marcus looked at me gently, sadly, and said, "She thought she was protecting you." That sentence hurt more than any lie. Because it came from love. Twisted love. Broken love. But love nonetheless. Marcus rubbed his jaw, eyes tired. Then he told me the part he had been avoiding, the part that dragged a fresh wave of dread through my chest. He said my aunt hadn't just suspected the switch. She said she had evidence. Real evidence. Old paperwork. Hidden letters. A single photograph. A photograph of two babies in the hospital nursery. Two newborn girls. Side by side in identical bassinets. But there were differences, tiny ones. One with a faint dimple on the chin. One with a small birthmark on the shoulder. Differences that would have mattered if anyone had bothered to look closely. My aunt had looked closely. She had studied that photo for years. She had memorized every feature. She had tried to reconcile what she saw with the child she raised. And then, Marcus said this carefully, my aunt told him that once, accidentally, she had seen my baby photo in my mother's house. And her heart stopped. Because she recognized me. From the photograph. I was the baby with the faint chin dimple. The one she had always believed was hers. The one she had lost before she ever got to hold her properly. My breath hitched so sharply I tasted blood. Marcus reached for my hand, I pulled back. Not because I didn't love him. But because I felt like I might shatter if anyone touched me at all. I stood up, pacing, hands trembling. Everything was unraveling faster than I could catch it. My mother had lied. My grandmother had orchestrated a disaster. My aunt had lived with suspicion and grief for decades. And I had grown up in a life that wasn't mine. I whispered that I needed to see her. Marcus asked who? My aunt? My mother? My cousin? I told him I needed to see all of them. But first, I needed to breathe. I stepped outside into the late morning heat. The sky was harsh and bright, the air thick with humidity. I felt sweat gather along my hairline, but I didn't move. I just stood on the porch, chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. Marcus didn't follow. Maybe he knew I needed space. Maybe he was afraid to push. Maybe he was afraid of what else I might learn. After a few minutes, I called my aunt. She picked up on the first ring. Her breath hitched when she heard my voice. She said she knew this day was coming. She said she was ready. I told her I was on my way. When I hung up, Marcus opened the door behind me. He looked pale, almost sick. He said he should come with me. He said we should face this as a team. I told him no. I told him I needed to do this alone. He nodded, swallowing hard. Before I walked away, he said my name softly. I turned. He told me there was one more thing, one last detail my aunt had told him that he hadn't shared yet, because he hadn't known how. I told him to say it. He hesitated for 3 long seconds. Then he said it. Your cousin. The girl raised in your place. She knows too. She has always known. I didn't breathe. Not for a long time. Because that single sentence rewrote everything again. She'd known. For years. Maybe decades. And she never said a word. I walked to my car in a fog, heart pounding, palms slick with sweat. I didn't start the engine right away. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the windshield without really seeing it. My cousin, my sister, knew. Which meant she knew I was the one they took. She knew she was the one they kept. She knew the truth about my mother and my aunt. She knew about the man who fathered us. She knew where she came from. And she had lived her entire life pretending she didn't. I drove to my aunt's house with numb hands and a stomach twisted so tightly I thought I might get sick. The air conditioning blasted against my face, but it didn't cool the heat gathering behind my eyes. When I parked outside her small, brick home, she was already standing at the door. Her shoulders were shaking. Her eyes swollen. Her arms wrapped around herself. She looked at me like a woman seeing her child for the first time. And behind her, standing in the hallway, was the girl who had grown up as my cousin. My sister. Her expression wasn't shock. It was recognition. And something else. Something darker. Something that made my skin prickle. Something that felt like she had been waiting for this moment for a very, very long time. I stepped inside. The door closed behind me. And everything began to unravel. The air inside my aunt's house felt thick, almost humid, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I stood frozen just past the doorway, my heartbeat thudding unevenly against my ribs. My aunt hovered beside me, fragile, trembling, hopeful and terrified all at once. But my eyes were locked on the girl standing a few steps behind her. My cousin. My sister. The girl who grew up beside me, yet not beside me at all. The girl who, according to Marcus, had always known. She didn't look away. She didn't step back. She didn't speak. She just watched me. And in her expression, I didn't see shock or confusion. I saw resignation. And something colder. Something like resentment wrapped in a thin veil of calm. My voice caught in my throat, but I forced myself to greet her, to say her name. She nodded, slowly, like she was acknowledging not my presence, but a truth that had been decided long before I walked through the door. My aunt gestured for us to sit at the dining table. She kept wringing her hands, rubbing her thumb against her palm like she was trying to scrub away years of guilt. I followed her, my palms damp, my legs trembling so hard I felt the chair shake when I sat. My cousin, my sister, sat across from me. Her posture was perfectly rigid. Her hands folded neatly. Her eyes locked on my face without blinking. She looked so much like me. Same cheekbones. Same mouth shape. Same slight, reluctant dimple when her lips tightened. It was like looking at an alternate version of myself, one who had been raised in someone else's story. My aunt sat between us, smoothing the tablecloth like she needed something to anchor her. After a long breath, she told me she wanted to explain everything. How it happened. Why it happened. What she remembered. What she regretted. She had rehearsed this. I could tell. But real confession never comes out neatly. She said the hospital switch haunted her even when she tried to deny it. She said she spent years studying my face, studying her daughter's face, trying to quiet a truth that refused to die. Her voice trembled more with each sentence. Then she looked at my cousin. Her daughter. And not her daughter. My cousin glanced at her briefly, then turned back to me with an expression I couldn't read. I told my aunt I knew everything Marcus had told me. She flinched at his name. I asked her to fill in the gaps, the pieces he didn't know or didn't understand. She hesitated, then began. She explained that after the births, mine and my cousin's, my grandmother had taken control immediately. She had taken both babies from the nurses, insisting she knew what was best for her daughters. My aunt said she trusted her. My mother trusted her. They were too scared, too young, too overwhelmed to question the matriarch of the family. My grandmother returned with one baby each. No explanation. No reassurance. No ability to question her. My aunt had doubts immediately. But she was young. Exhausted. Afraid. She told herself she was imagining things. She told herself guilt was twisting her mind. But when the babies were brought home, she noticed something odd. Her supposed daughter didn't seem to respond to her voice. Didn't seem soothed by her. And my mother's baby seemed unusually calm around her, almost familiar. Years passed. Doubts grew. But doubt is not proof. Then she said something that made the room tilt. When we were 3 years old, me and the girl across from me, there had been an accident. A fall. A scare. A trip to the doctor. Nothing serious. Except for what the doctor mentioned almost casually, an inherited benign spinal marking. A pattern seen in certain families. A genetic echo. A marking that ran on my mother's side. Not my aunt's. My aunt froze when she told that part. Because that was the first day she truly feared the truth. She had the wrong child. My cousin never looked away from me. Not once. I asked her if she had known all her life. Her lips curved, the faintest, saddest, coldest smile. She said she wasn't stupid. She said she saw the way her mother looked at me. She said she heard the adults whispering. She said she felt the distance between her and the woman who raised her. She said she felt something was missing. She said she spent her childhood trying to earn a love that never fully clicked, never fully rooted, because it wasn't built on blood. Then her voice dropped. Lower. Sharper. She said she used to envy me. Because my mother, loved me fiercely. Consistently. Unconditionally. She said she wondered why her own mother didn't look at her the same way. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something colder. Bitterness. Then I asked the question I had been avoiding since the moment I stepped inside. Why didn't you say anything? Her expression hardened. She said that if she had said anything, then what? She'd be taken from the only home she knew? She'd be returned like a misplaced item? She'd be forced to join a family that should have been hers but wasn't? She said she stayed quiet to survive. To exist. To keep her world intact. She said she didn't owe anyone a truth that would destroy everyone while giving her nothing. The silence after that was suffocating. My aunt sobbed softly, burying her face in her hands. She said she tried to love her the best she could. She said she tried to forget the doubts. She said she failed both of us. My cousin's voice softened, barely. She said she forgave her mother years ago. But she didn't forgive the lie. And she didn't forgive the woman who forced them all into silence. My grandmother. The architect of the switch. My pulse pounded in my ears. I asked her if she hated me. She shook her head slowly. She said she didn't hate me. She said she never hated me. She said the only thing she hated was that I had lived a life that should have been hers. That I had received the love she was starving for. That I had grown up wanted. Claimed. Chosen. Her voice cracked, not with emotion, but with exhaustion. She said she spent years imagining the day the truth came out. Years imagining what it would mean for her. Years wondering if I would take her place. Years wondering if she would lose the only identity she'd ever had. I whispered, I didn't want her life. I didn't want to take anything from her. She nodded. But her voice was just above a whisper when she said, that doesn't change the fact that it happened. The air went still. My aunt reached across the table, grabbing her daughter's hand with trembling fingers. She begged her to understand, to try to see the pain she had lived with all these years. My cousin pulled her hand away. Then she looked at me and said the final truth. She didn't want a new family. She didn't want me as a sister. She didn't want any of this. She wanted the life she had. Good or bad, complicated or broken. She wanted the life she had lived. She whispered. And I don't want to trade. My aunt broke. Fully. Completely. I sat frozen, feeling a grief so layered I didn't know what part hurt most. Then my cousin stood and stepped closer to me. For a moment, I thought she might hug me. But instead, she said, you should ask Marcus what else he found. He didn't tell you everything. My blood ran cold. She walked away. Out the back door. Into the heat. Without looking back. My aunt whispered. She knows. I asked, voice barely working, what she meant. My aunt said. She knows who your father is. My vision blurred. My breath caught. She said. She knows exactly what your husband has been hiding from you. My heart stopped. I whispered. What does Marcus have to do with my father? And my aunt, trembling, hollow-eyed, whispered the twist I didn't see coming. He went digging into the past. And he found a man still alive. A man who knew the truth. A man who had been waiting to be found. Your father. And the worst part? Marcus met him. Before you ever knew he existed. The room spun. My knees buckled. My aunt grabbed my arm. She whispered the last blow. Marcus didn't tell you. Because your father told him not to. I felt everything in me collapse at once. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if my marriage had been love. Or a secret born long before I ever knew myself. For a moment I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even think. It was like someone had unplugged the world. The ceiling, the walls, my aunt's trembling face, all of it blurred at the edges. Marcus. My husband. The man who held me through sleepless nights, who talked me down from panic, who kissed my forehead before work. He had met my father. Before I even knew who my father was. My aunt kept whispering my name, but it sounded far away, like she was calling to me from underwater. I finally found my voice, thin and shaky. I asked her what she meant. What she knew. What exactly Marcus had done. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, took a breath that rattled like paper, and started explaining. She said Marcus had come to her months ago, right after he found those files in my mother's apartment. She had assumed he was there because he cared about me, because he wanted to help. She thought he was being a supportive husband. But he didn't come alone. He came with a folder. A thick one. Full of questions, timelines, and clues he had pieced together. He already suspected the switch. Before my aunt confessed anything. Before my mother hinted at the truth. Before I even knew I had something to search for. He had been investigating my past on his own. Without telling me. My aunt's voice broke again as she continued. She said Marcus asked for names. Old family names. People connected to my grandmother. Men who had been around during the year I was born. She didn't want to help him at first. She told him it wasn't his story to solve. She said he was crossing a boundary he didn't understand. But then he told her something that changed her mind. He told her he had a reason to believe my father was still alive. My knees buckled. I sat down hard, breath catching. I asked her how he knew. What he had found. She closed her eyes and whispered the detail that made my entire body go cold. Marcus recognized a signature. A signature on an old legal document he found mixed in with my grandmother's things, something that should have meant nothing. A medical authorization form. A handwritten consent. A scrawled name that Marcus had seen before. Not in my mother's documents. Not in my aunt's. In his own. It was the same messy looping handwriting from Marcus's childhood medical records. The same signature that had appeared on all the forms his mother never wanted to talk about. The same man who had signed as his emergency contact before he died. Marcus recognized my father's signature because our fathers had known each other. My aunt kept going, tears spilling down her cheeks. She said Marcus brought her the document and asked if she recognized the name. She did. She said my grandmother had once mentioned him. Not kindly. Not warmly. But with a kind of tight-lipped disgust reserved for the worst kind of man. And that man. The one my grandmother hated. The one she tried to erase from every story. Was still alive. Living just outside the city. Quiet. Alone. Unmarried. No family left. Or so people thought. My aunt finally looked at me directly. she whispered. He's your father. And Marcus met him. My breath shattered. I shook my head, trying to push the words away, trying to make them rearrange into something less horrifying. But she wasn't finished. She said Marcus went alone because he didn't want to hurt me if it wasn't true. Because he wanted answers before giving me another wound. But when he met the man who had known my grandmother, the man who had once been involved with both her daughters, he didn't deny it. He told Marcus the truth. He said he remembered my mother. He said he remembered my aunt. He said he remembered everything. And then my aunt whispered the part that made me dizzy. He knew one of the babies had been switched. He just didn't know which one. Until Marcus showed him a picture of me. The man told Marcus he knew instantly. He pointed at my face in the photo and said, "That's my daughter." I couldn't breathe. The room felt too small. Too hot. Too loud. My aunt kept talking, but her voice blurred. I caught fragments. He wanted to meet you. Marcus told him no. That you needed time. That the truth would destroy you. Marcus had decided for me. Again. My stomach twisted hard. I asked why Marcus hadn't told me. Why he let me walk blind while he held the truth like a secret. My aunt hesitated. Then said the sentence that felt like a knife. He didn't tell you. Because he was afraid you would leave him. That dropped like a stone in my chest. My husband had been choosing which truths I deserved. He had been deciding what my identity should be. Who I belonged to. Who I didn't. What I could handle. What I couldn't. He had played God with my life. With my story. With my blood. My aunt reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I needed air. I pushed back from the table, nearly stumbling as I stood. My legs trembled beneath me. My sister, my cousin, watched me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Maybe pity. Maybe contempt. Maybe nothing at all. I walked to the front door in a daze. My aunt called my name. My sister didn't say a word. Outside, the heat wrapped around me like a blanket I didn't want. The air tasted like metal. Like something burning. My phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. He asked if I was okay. He said he was worried. He asked if I needed him. I stared at the screen, tears blurring the words. Then a second message came through. A single sentence. I didn't want you to meet him until you were ready. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. Because beneath everything. Beneath the lies. Beneath the secrets. Beneath the betrayal. Marcus wasn't trying to protect himself. He was trying to protect me. And I didn't know whether to hate him for it. Or break for him because of it. I drove home with shaking hands, my pulse pounding in my ears. When I walked into the house, Marcus was waiting in the living room, standing like a man waiting for a verdict. He opened his mouth to speak. But I held up a hand. I told him I knew everything. I told him my aunt had told me. I told him he didn't get to choose my truth for me. He stepped forward. Then stopped. His voice cracked when he apologized. Not with excuses. Not with justification. Just raw, terrified regret. He told me he had never been more afraid in his life. Not of the truth. But of losing me because of it. Then he said something that made my knees weaken. He said he had grown up without answers too. Without a real father. Without truth. Without security. He said he could survive anything. Except watching the woman he loved shatter the way he had. He said he had tried to hold the truth just long enough. For me to breathe before drowning. He stepped closer. He said he loved me. That he always had. That he always would. No matter what blood said. My vision blurred with tears. I told him the truth was mine to carry. Not his to manage. Not his to soften. Not his to withhold. He nodded, tears filling his eyes. Then I asked the question I had been avoiding. Where is he? My father. The man who had been both a ghost and a shadow in my life. Marcus swallowed hard. Then said. He's waiting. He said he'll meet you whenever you're ready. I took a breath. A long, shaky, terrifying breath. And whispered. I'm ready. Marcus closed his eyes. Like he'd been holding his own breath for months. He asked if I wanted him to come with me. I looked at him, really looked at him. The man who had kept truths. But also carried my pain. Held my fears. And tried, however imperfectly, to protect me from breaking. I took his hand. And whispered. Yes. We got in the car. We drove across the city. The sky hung low and heavy, as if holding its own secret. When we pulled into the driveway of a small, aging house on a quiet street lined with old oak trees, my heart hammered so loudly I thought it might split. The front door opened. A man stepped out. Older. Weathered. Eyes too familiar. My eyes. He froze when he saw me. As if he'd been waiting not minutes. But decades. My breath caught. My knees trembled. Marcus squeezed my hand. And for the first time in my entire life, I stepped toward the truth. Instead of running from it. The man's eyes softened. He whispered a word I had never heard from his lips. My name. And in that moment, with the past behind me, and my entire identity shifting beneath my feet, I realized something simple. And devastating. Some families are built on love. Some are built on blood. And some, like mine, are built on secrets. That shape the very air we breathe. But I wasn't running anymore. And this time, the truth was mine.